We're on the beach. We've landed, huh?
We have landed.
We have landed. We have a foothold. Good morning. It's an absolute pleasure and a thrill to be with you here today and share what is my experience, the experience in the U.S. 10 years ago there, I said that we were creating a movement that would transform our service delivery system. And now you're creating your own movement that indeed will transform people's experience of receiving services and participating in delivering services. This whole thing is going to look different in a few years. So indeed, you have created a movement too, and things are going to look different. We didn't have this figured out when we started, by no means. We kind of had a dream, we had a vision about what we would like to show up, which was people have a better experience, that our real purpose would be fulfilled, which is not to treat mental illness. Let's face it, our real purpose is to help people have a better life. That's really what we're about, and that's a life as they define it, and that's what our dream was. We didn't know how we were going to get there, and frankly, we just started, and sometimes we had to make it up as we went along. But indeed, it was a movement that has resulted in tremendous transformation. So that today in the U.S., there are 27 states that have peer support as a required benefit in their Medicaid programs. Getting peer workers, peer leaders, I don't know if I like the word workers. I was commenting on this yesterday because when we put peers on teams, they're really leaders. With peer leaders getting paid on a par with the other members of the team to deliver peer support services, 27 states. We have probably trained about 5,000 peer support specialists around the country. We have employed probably about 3,000 peer employees, many of whom have gone on to other organizations or other jobs. Truly, this indeed is a global movement. We were in Singapore, we've trained in Scotland, here, so many places in the U.S. So it's just a thrill to see the progress that's been made in a relatively short period of time. I like the essay from Emerson called Prudence because in there he says, when skating on thin ice, our safety's in our speed. And when we step out and do something different that is indeed disruptive, and innovation is disruptive, we get on thin ice. But we don't want to fall through, so we keep going with velocity, and that's how it was for us. Because once the movement gets started, it has momentum. There's no turning back, We're learning to ride the bicycle, And I haven't ridden a bicycle for a long time, but I know that I still can, because I learned how to do that. So thinking out of the box with recovery, Eugene Johnson from Phoenix, Arizona, we now have services because of this movement. We now have services in 5 states in the U.S. in 22 different locations, services in New Zealand, and my label, we all have our labels, right? Sometimes they're a diagnosis. I think chief executive officers probably like that. But I had to recreate myself, and so I refer to my label, CEO, as creating extraordinary opportunities. And I think we could all take that on, to be the CEO in our work and create those extraordinary opportunities that perhaps we don't even know about today. So we had to change our mind because, frankly, and I've been in this business, my goodness, over 40 years. And for 30 years, I had the wrong ideas. And I thought for people with serious mental illness that were labeled with serious mental illnesses, that our goal was to keep them out of the hospital. In fact, our mission as an organization was to be the premier provider of crisis stabilization services. Well, it's good to be the best, but the best at what? And as I began to listen to people, they said, that's not what we want. We want to have a life. We want to move on. So we had to recreate ourselves and we had to change our mind, and this was the mission statement that we adopted as our purpose in 2000. It's guided our work ever since, to create, and I love those two words, to create. Think about it. It's up to us to create something perhaps that hasn't been done before. What are we creating? We're not creating recovery, because recovery is the person's job, right? But we can create an opportunity, and we can create an environment in which people can get their power back and in which they can recover. And we want to have success. We want to have goals. We want to see things happening. We want to see movement happening. So one of the signs of recovery is our people moving on, because for too long they've been stuck, in institutions, in group homes, on the street. And we got to connect, because we got to do this together. We got to connect to who we really are, to each other, and finally remember and recover what we're here for, our purpose. That's that kind of spiritual dimension that people discover as so powerful as one of the pathways to recovery. So, about 6 years ago, we created ourselves to communicate really this mission of recovery, and called ourselves Recovery Innovations. And I say recovery plus innovation because recovery calls us to be innovative. And this is our definition of recovery. There are lots of definitions, and sometimes they fill a full page, and I can't remember them so well, but I like this because it's simple: remembering who you are and using your strengths to be all you were meant to be. It's said very well by Parker Palmer in his book, Let Your Life Speak. The author, teacher, we arrive in this world with birthright gifts. Get that? Then we spend the first half of our lives abandoning them or letting others disabuse us of them. As young people, we're surrounded by expectations that may have little to do with who we really are, expectations held by people who are not trying to discern our selfhood, but to fit us into slots. Under social pressures like racism, sexism, and I would add mentalism, our original shape is deformed beyond recognition, and we ourselves, driven by fear, too often betray our true self. We forget who we are. So in recovery, whether it's us working or whether it's a person we're working with, we have to remember our purpose, who we really are, those birthright gifts. Innovation, what does that mean? Something that we haven't done before. Oh my goodness. Something unexpected, or maybe something even impossible. Let's take it on. Let's do something that we think is impossible. If it's not hard, it's not worth doing. And it's disruptive. This is uncomfortable. We don't know where we're at. We kind of lose our footing, and it destabilizes things. But we need to break up the status quo. It's a new day. It's a movement. We do this together. So as we build a team and we experience this disruption of taking risk, not knowing exactly where we're going, how do we get through that? We do it together, like we're doing here today. We need partners. We need a team. We're going to make mistakes. Oh my gosh. And mistakes actually are a good thing. It's okay, because that's how we learn. Samsung's performance improvement motto, fail often to succeed faster. That's the pathway to success. CNN documentary on innovation said the ability to fail efficiently is the key to innovation. Failing efficiently. And sometimes we try things and they don't work. And this is how private industry creates new products. They just try it, and it doesn't work. It's a flop. They try it again as fast as they can, and it fails again. And they keep trying until they find something that works. They don't need evidence. The evidence is in the product. The evidence is in the people's response to the product. They don't do research, about a new technology. They just try it. And that's what we need to get better at. This all starts with a vision. And this Italian that spent 5 years laying on his back painting the ceiling had a big vision. If you've been there, you know how beautiful that is. But the U.S. government gave gave the states, the U.S., a vision about 6 years ago in the new Freedom Commission report. And I love this. I could not believe this when I read it. I think it was the Bush administration that appointed this commission, which is pretty amazing. There was something good that happened there. We envision a future when everyone with a mental illness will recover. Now that's a dream, isn't it? That's a vision. Everyone, 100%, will recover. You know, sometimes I say we could even make it bigger than that and just drop the mental illness part and say we envision a future when everyone will recover. Because this is for all of us. Goodness gracious, the world needs this, doesn't it? So, one of the things that became clear to me as I began to listen to people who were experiencing our services is that some of what we did was traumatizing. And in fact, some of what we did was a violent intervention, and we had words like safety intervention, and we thought these takedowns and these restraints were necessary to keep people safe. But in fact, in any other setting, if you think about it, other than a ward in a hospital or our crisis unit on the front end, this would be an assault. This would be abuse. You could get arrested for this. But somehow we think it was necessary. So I said, we're going to stop the violence. We're going to start to try to find a different way to treat people. And then along comes Bill Anthony from Boston University, one of our mentors and a dear colleague, who came up with this concept, this practice of no force first. And he challenged the field because he pointed out that there's no such thing as forced recovery. You can't force someone to recover. And that the conditions that generate forced treatment are easily trumped by our seeming indifference to the massive use of force in the mental health culture. Let us commit to figuring out how to stop our mindless use of force. Let us use our best minds to figure out how to extricate our field from being society's purveyors of force. That's not our job. Our job is recovery. And as we begin to build opportunities for people to recover, the force becomes the last thing that we even think about. We're too quick to call the police. We're too quick to lock somebody up. So by listening to the experience of the people we serve, the stories we heard were not the stories that warmed my heart. You know, they were stories of trauma, victim, survivor. And so I made a declaration that we were going to stop the use of force, and we began to employ peers on our teams to help us figure out how to do that. And we saw a fundamental different attitude and shift in our culture. And we said, we're going to stop restraining people 100%. And once you make a declaration for something that is big and that transformation that may even be impossible, that hasn't been done before, those words carry you forward. You get into what I call committed action and get busy. And you begin to see the results. In one of our centers, we had our first month with no restraint event in 5.5 months. In month 8, I'm sorry. In the second center, it took 15 months, but we had a dream and we were persistent and we kept measuring the results. We kept learning from our mistakes, and we included people that had been traumatized by being restrained as our key informants in a debriefing event that happened right after the restraint event. Once we've achieved that month with zero restraint, it became embedded in our practice. We'll never go back to the old way. And what happened was not what we were afraid might happen. We didn't have an increase in staff injuries. In fact, we had a decrease because when people get hurt is when they're doing these kinds of interventions. We didn't have to call the police. We were afraid we might. The police continued to bring people to us. We thought they might not trust this and that they would take them to jail or something else. We didn't have an increase in chemical restraint. And today, in our recovery response centers, which is our crisis and emergency service, we don't even have a seclusion or restraint room. So we broke the rules and then convinced the regulators that we didn't use the room, why should we have it? So they took it out of the rules. So sometimes we just have to get busy, step out and do something that hasn't been done before, knowing that it's the right thing to do, prepared to be an advocate for that right thing and take some risk. The system will change because we really believe that everyone wants to have a better result. So what is this thing we call peer support? In 1999, I had the idea that what was happening over there in the peer-run services, like drop-in centers, socialization activities, what I saw going on, I had the pleasure to start 3 of these organizations. It was really good stuff, but it was kind of on the side, and no one was paying much attention to it, and it wasn't very well funded and oftentimes at risk in terms of business or infrastructure. So I thought, what if we could team up? What if they could come over and join our teams and be a service provider, be a peer provider? So we got started, and in October 1999, we trained 15 people, we hired them all, and by the end of that year, we had hired 66 peers on our teams, and something started to change. And we began to experience these kinds of things. There was a new level of hope and engagement. If she can do it, if he can do it, so can I. That's the credibility that comes from the lived experience, right? A new profound sense of empathy, a new kind of understanding from having been there. Mutuality in the relationship. So we got out of being the expert, and we stopped thinking that our job was to fix people, because our peers on our teams would say, no, the real job is to be with people. Just walk beside people. And as we provide that level of mutuality and support, people find their way, and that's what's shown up. Now, it's an intentional relationship. When we started out, we said, define it yourself. If you want to be friends, that's great, blah, blah, blah. We learned that no, peer support has to be going somewhere. There has to be agreements. What are the goals? What happens if we get off track? What do we do then? How do we know when we're finished? So it's an intentional relationship that has a purpose. Steve is talking about that tipping point, and we need to work to get there as quickly as we can. That's the transformation point. We say it's a minimum of 25% of the peers, so if you have 120 peers employed in the country,